Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you to Christ Presbyterian Church this evening. My name is Will Massey. I am the associate pastor here, and I just briefly have some words of gratitude. As I see you all here, it is good to be with you. Certainly, I lament and grieve the circumstances that have led us to be together, but am nevertheless grateful for the partnerships that have emerged in the Madison community, partnerships that our church has benefited from, friendships as we pursue the work of seeking justice and an end to violence in Palestine. I want to say gratitude as well for the leadership of people from Christ Presbyterian and from other faith communities, other communities that has helped us to continue to discern how we can respond, how we can speak and act in this moment. So I'm grateful for those leaders that have encouraged us as a church and the community at large to listen and to take action. And of course, I want to say thank you to Dr. Sidhwa for his testimony, his willingness to tell the truth, to tell stories, and for the testimony of people like him, people who have been willing to lay down their security and sometimes their lives in order to stand in the breach and care for people in a very vulnerable and fearful situation. And with that, I would like to invite Mark Rosenthal to join me up here to speak about Jewish Voices for Peace and their role in tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. This is a very special moment for us in Jewish Voice for Peace and for anybody involved in the struggle for social justice here in Madison and in the Great Lakes region. So on behalf of Jewish Voice for Peace, I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight. We are incredibly grateful to have been able to arrange for Dr. Feroze Sidhwa to join us. Again, I believe we have this incredible opportunity to hear somebody who has borne witness, who has been on the ground, who offers incredibly deep solidarity that he'll be talking with us about tonight. But a lot of people have made this possible. It's officially sort of sponsored by WRT Radio that you'll see there, the Middle East Studies Department, the Havens Right Center, the church here, Christ Presbyterian First Unitarian Society. We're all official sponsors. But equally important, there are countless organizations within the Madison area and the state that really went to work to push this out and share it. The DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, the Madison Rafa Sister City, Jewish Voice for Peace, World Beyond War, Code Pink, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the Mennonite Madison group. I mean, there are many, many, many different people who came together to make this possible. And we are speaking on a number of different things. We started last night. We've had 2 other meetings or gatherings today. We'll be meeting again at the Anti-War Cafe at the crossing at 1127 University Avenue. And then on Sunday, we're going to more meetings and sharing in Milwaukee. So a tremendous amount of work has gone into this, and I am grateful to all those who put that effort in. And I really don't have anything that I can add to what Dr. Sidhwa will explain about the situation in Gaza. But what I can do is share a very critical message on behalf of Jewish Voice for Peace. And that is that criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism, criticism of the U.S. policies that support and fund a genocide in Gaza, $30 billion over the last 20 months. That is not anti-Semitic. And frankly, there's a lot of people, a lot of voices in the peace movement, but as a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, that's probably the most important message that we can put out now, because the extreme right wing Extreme right-wing forces, particularly here in the United States, are working to suppress Palestinian voices, suppress the pro-Palestinian movement, to label it as only anti-Semitic, as terrorist, as only Hamas, as anti-American, and we absolutely reject this. And Jewish Voice for Peace, as the world's largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization, say that this is a lie. And we are part of a long and proud history of Jews who are not Zionists. The weaponization of anti-Semitism The weaponization of anti-Semitism is being used to attack and dismantle fundamental social, educational, and progressive institutions. This is incredibly dangerous and frankly makes it impossible to address the very real danger of anti-Semitism, which is real but impossible to deal with given how it has been weaponized by the extreme right. Tonight's talk, and I'm very proud of this, will also be live streamed through a webinar by the International Solidarity Working Group of 350. Now, 350 is a climate organization, and this particular committee of 350, the International Solidarity Working Group, has been doing a series of workshops on climate and colonialism, climate and militarism, and today's live stream, which is happening right now, is part of that kind of programming. It is intersectional organizing happening in real time right now, and it's incredibly valuable and incredibly important to be doing that kind of work. And I believe that it's not just a nice idea. It doesn't just fit. It's actually strategic for us to come together in our various organizations and capacities to understand the commonalities of the struggles that we have and to work together. It's going to be recorded. That recording will be made available. And now it's time for me to turn it over to another member of Jewish Voice for Peace, Esti Denur, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Well said. So first I say amen to everything that we heard from Mark. And I will also add, as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor and the survivor of the Nazi Blitz on London, that this message that I heard as a child, never again, never again, never again, for anyone, anywhere. I want to, before I introduce Dr. Feroze, I would like to take a moment of silence to think, remember, pray for all those who have died, injured, become orphaned, lost their children, incarcerated, lost their homes, which is almost 100% of all Palestinians. So if you don't mind, if you can take with me a moment of silence, and whatever you do, pray your thoughts. Thank you so much. And another thing before I introduce our good doctor is I want to tell you that when we invited him, we asked him how much money we need to raise to bring him here and to, you know, some per diem and so on. And his answer was nothing. He paid to get here, he's paying his way, we have not given him a penny. But We still are raising money for the Middle East Children's Alliance. Both Jewish Voice for Peace and the Madison Rafa Sister City have been working with this organization for a long time, and as we understand, they still are working in Gaza to provide food and water to children and their families. So we have QR codes at the entrance. As you leave, you can just donate right away with your phones. If you prefer to write a check or to give cash, just find one of us and we will get it to Mecca. So yeah, hope to raise some good money for their good work. Speaking of good, a good doctor, Dr. Sidhwa is a general trauma and critical care surgeon in California. He has volunteered in Gaza hospitals twice, at the European Hospital in Khan Yunis from March 25 to April 8, 2024, and again at Nasser Hospital from March 3rd to April 1, 2025. He has written and spoken extensively about surgical humanitarian work, the United States' role in the Israel-Palestine situation, and the political consequences of medical relief work, as well as the responsibility of the United States for what's happening there. So with that, let's welcome Dr. Feroze Sidhwa. He will talk for about 30 minutes, and then there will be Q&A.
No, sit down. Please sit down. Oh my God. There's no need. Is this working okay? Can you hear me through this mic? Yeah, great. So yeah, thanks for the nice introductions. My name's Feroze. I'm a trauma surgeon out in California, and yeah, I've been to Gaza twice since October 7th, and I've been in other places too: Ukraine, Zimbabwe, Haiti. But Gaza was something that's really quite different. You guys probably already know that, but I'll just tell you about two cases that I did. Both of them were the first time I was there, just because they kind of illustrate a lot about what's going on there, what we've done to this place, and then maybe we can just have a discussion and see whatever people are curious about, or people can organize with each other, whatever works. So the first case was a 9-year-old girl. She's a kid named Juri, and about 2 weeks before I met her, her mom and dad had received a phone call, and also the Israelis had dropped flyers on their neighborhood telling them that they have to evacuate from Khan Yunis, where they live, and that's where European Hospital is. And so they did. They packed up their kids, went south to their parents' home in Rafah, so the kids' grandparents. And they dropped the kids off there, and then mom and dad went out to look for all the things that you need to keep kids and grandparents alive, food, water, medicine, whatever it might be. And when they came back, the house had been destroyed. It was blown up. The neighbors said, your kids or the grandparents are dead. The kids are all distributed to different hospitals. Juri had gone to European Hospital, where I would eventually meet her, and the other kids had gone to the Kuwaiti Specialty Hospital on the other side of the city. And so when Juri got there, she was pretty badly injured, and the team that was there, they patched her up, did the best they could. They put an external fixator on her left leg. That's the metal bar with the pins that go into your bones to hold them steady. And then they admitted her to the hospital. About 2 weeks later is when I found her. And she just, I was waiting in the preoperative area. I was there during Ramadan. And in Ramadan, the Muslims eat an evening meal called iftar. So kind of everything closes down when the sun is setting. And everyone goes to eat, but I'm not Muslim, so I was in the preoperative area just waiting for something to happen. And I was there with Mark Perlmutter, who had gone with me. And this sick little girl rolls in, and the nurse says, can you do her operation? So of course we said, no, we have no idea who she is or what operation she needs. But we took a look at her, and it's pretty obvious she was going to be dead in a few hours. Her heart rate was about 160 or 170. Her blood pressure was undetectable. Mentally, she was completely altered. I actually thought she was 4 years old just because of the way she was acting. All she would do, anytime somebody tried to talk to her or touch her, she would just scream, Wayne Baba, where's my dad? And so we tried to, and so, we were looking at her, but again, we just couldn't anesthetize her without tormenting her, or excuse me, we couldn't examine her without tormenting her. So we decided to take the risk of putting her under anesthesia, which thankfully went fine. And when we did, what we found was that this little, thin little 9-year-old girl had these horrendous wounds to her buttocks and to her left leg, and her right arm was broken as well, but that was the least of her problems. The wound on her left buttock was so deep that it cut through to the bones in her pelvis. It was an incredible wound, and it was covered in maggots. Maggots just fell out everywhere on the table when we turned her over, and those maggots are actually probably the only reason she didn't die. So as we went on, Mark and I realized that whoever did this operation on jury was just completely incompetent. Couldn't possibly have done a worse operation. They left all this necrotic tissue on her, and I know this doesn't mean much to most people, but it was just total surgical incompetence. And so we were pretty upset at the end of the operation. She did fine after that operation. Thankfully, her sepsis resolved. She started to improve. She started to eat a little bit more. And we were pretty upset. Went around and tried to find who did this operation. It's at least got to be told that they're not doing these things correctly. Well, eventually we found the answer. The orthopedic surgeon who was supposed to be on call that day was dead. So the residents and the med students had operated on her by themselves. They didn't know what was going on. They did the best they could, So that's we felt terrible when we figured that out. We said, oh no, good job. So me, Mark, Victoria Rose, and then 4 or 5 other surgeons spent about about 30 or 40 hours over the next 8 or 9 days fixing this girl up enough to where her septic shock had actually resolved. And back then, the Rafah border was still open, and some aid was actually still getting into Khan Yunis and into Gaza in general, not to the north, but into Rafah and Khan Yunis. And so her dad was actually able to go out, find food for her, not much, but something. And it was kind of nice because she actually did eventually recover her wits about her. She started acting like a 9-year-old instead of a baby. And all of a sudden she realized that she had her dad really firmly in her pocket and could tell him to do whatever she wanted because he was so terrified that she was going to die just a few days earlier, which she didn't remember, So she started demanding honey melon and phone calls with her siblings in the other hospital, not understanding that this is a land in famine and the cell service has been destroyed. So this man, it was really incredible to see how much he loved his daughter. And he was probably a little bit younger than me, about this tall. And he was just fanatically dedicated to her because she's a 9-year-old. She doesn't understand why she can't have these things that she's asking for. And she would say, I'm not. This is all in Arabic. I couldn't understand it, but she would say, I'm not going to undergo any more of this stupid surgery stuff unless you get me what I want, honey melon and phone calls with my siblings. And so he would go out and he would just, I don't know what on earth he would have to do, but he would find something sweet for her to eat. Some piece of candy, some piece of chocolate, a strawberry, like just something. And of course she would complain about it. This isn't what I wanted. It's like, but it was really, it was a nice moment to be able to see a dad kind of struggle with the normal struggles of life of how do you deal with your daughter who won't stop complaining about things, and his daughter being a normal kid even in these horrendous circumstances. So that case just kind of illustrates a few things. Like the one is the violence that's been directed at children in the Gaza Strip is really an absolutely shocking phenomenon to see in person. I'll tell you, the statistics bear it out as well. It's just kind of incredible. But to see it in person, about half of my severely injured patients. I'm a trauma surgeon, so my main job is to stop people from bleeding to death. And about half of the patients that I did that in were small kids, and I mean kids under the age of pre-teenage kids, under 12 and under. One of the things that was really striking to us when I was in Gaza the first time, especially, was the widespread shooting of small children in the head and in the chest, especially. I wrote about this in the New York Times after I got back, but I was hardly the first person to do so. Basically, any time there are Israeli ground troops present in an area, children are being shot in the head and the chest on a regular basis, not one today and one in 3 months, but 1 a day, 2 a day, 3 a day. Often whole families actually come in with single gunshot wounds to the head of a 3, 5, 7, and 9-year-old. And it's a pretty shocking thing to see. And again, this is just to emphasize what was said before. This is not something the Israelis are doing. It's something we're doing. We always have to remember that. We have to understand what's going on by looking at what's going on, and it's happening over there, but we're the ones funding it. Without our support, it wouldn't be happening. But the second case is a case of a 29-year-old man, he was 29 when I met him, named Tamer. He was an orthopedic surgical nurse at the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza. I'm thinking Beit Lahia, if I remember right. And Tamer he must have done quite well in high school. Gaza has about 60% youth unemployment, which means 60% male youth unemployment. And it has since about 2014, after Operation Protective Edge, the Israeli attack on Gaza in that year. The Palestinian economy was essentially completely destroyed. The Palestinian middle class was completely destroyed as well. Gaza used to be divided between refugees and non-refugees. So the refugees were the people who were pushed out of Israel in 1948 into Gaza. That was about 250,000 people. And the local indigenous population to Gaza was about 60 or 70,000 people. The refugees obviously overwhelmed the middle class, but when you become a refugee, especially if you were a landed peasant at the time, a farmer or an urban day laborer, you basically have nothing. You just go to a refugee camp and you hope that somebody gives you enough to survive. So there was a middle class which was largely non-refugee, and a large, poor mass of people that were refugees. But in 2014, that attack kind of ended up destroying the Palestinian middle class completely. It destroyed the apartment blocks they lived in. It destroyed most of their businesses. It destroyed most of the factories and chicken farms and things like that still existed in Gaza. So they also ended up joining the impoverished masses. And at that point, about 80% of the population was dependent on humanitarian aid from 2014 onward. Well, Tamer must have done, like I said, quite well for himself in high school, because after the high school exit exam, that's what determines what you'll go do after that, he went to the Palestine College of Nursing. And he must have done quite well there as well, because after that he became an orthopedic surgical nurse at Indonesian Hospital, which was I think maybe like a 50 or 60 bed subspecialty orthopedic and neurosurgical hospital in northern Gaza. And so he got this quite prestigious position as a nurse in the operating room, closing wounds, making intraoperative decisions with the surgeon, things like that. There are pictures on his Facebook page of him presenting posters at local research meetings and things like that. So he was clearly quite a functional person. In late November of 2023, so just a few months after, maybe almost 2 months after the October 7th attacks, he was in the operating room closing a wound at the end of a case, and which is his job. And Israeli soldiers raided the hospital. They came into the OR and they demanded that he leave his patient. And he's, I think reasonably, like almost any doctor would, he said, "No, I can't do that. I have to, the guy can't just stay under anesthesia until you're done interrogating me." So they shot him in his knee, and then left him on the operating room floor. So he was picked up by his own team. They put an external fixator across his knee, which had been destroyed, and they put him in the hospital. Well, again, looking at his Facebook page, there's pictures of him from that day and the day after, and you can see that he still looks physically well. Like, he's obviously been injured and he's been traumatized and he's been victimized, no doubt about that. But this kind of momentary loss of human dignity is something that people can recover from with the right kind of support, the right kind of care. But what happened to him next is really pretty different. The next day or the day after, the Israelis raided the hospital again, and they found him in his room and took him, probably to Sidhwa in one of the torture chambers that's been built in the Negev desert, but who knows. And according to him, he was strapped to a table for 45 days. He was blindfolded the entire time. He was fed a juice box every day or every other day. He was neglected so severely that the external fixator on his leg became infected, giving him osteomyelitis. And he was beaten so badly that his right eyeball had to be removed when he was finally released. After 45 days, he was just dumped naked on the side of a road. This is how most Palestinian prisoners are actually released. He's just dumped naked on the side of a road, crawled on his butt because he couldn't use his leg, obviously, and for about 2 kilometers, and eventually was picked up by somebody who put him on a donkey cart and brought him to a European hospital. That was about 2 weeks before I met him. When I met him, he still had persistent sepsis. Somebody had removed the external fixator because they thought that was the cause of his ongoing sepsis and sickness, which it was, but they didn't realize that the pin sites also needed to be debrided. The parts where the metal actually drives into the bone had become necrotic. So me and Mark Perlmutter, we just debrided those aggressively. We were able to give him the antibiotics that we had brought with us, which he can't do now, but we could back then. And he did physically recover, for sure. On the day we left, we have a nice picture of him sitting in a wheelchair outside in the hospital courtyard. Well, his recovery was impeded by a few major things. Number one, the condition of the hospital was really quite shocking. There were about 10,000 people sheltering on the grounds of the hospital, like on the hospital's campus. They were sharing 4 toilets and 1 water spigot. It's pretty shocking numbers. They're actually, to be fair, they're better than the 500,000 people that are currently in the Mawasi, where there's 120 toilets available, but still pretty bad. Beyond that, the hospital was housing 1,500 people in the corridors, so like the hallways of the hospital were lined with families' tents. Everything was just attached to the false ceiling or the gas pipes or whatever they could find above it to just give some kind of sectioned off privacy. It's a conservative Arab society, and privacy and modesty are at a premium. And on top of that, it's a 250-bed hospital with 1,500 people admitted to it. So it's just absolutely shocking. Like, I don't know if there's any healthcare workers in the room, but if you can imagine 7 people per bed, it's just totally outrageous. And so, you can imagine there were people using every electrical outlet. Every bathroom is constantly being used. The hospital's not meant to actually do this, right? So like the radiology department was constantly flooding with sewage, just raw sewage that was backing up. And that was made worse by the fact that Gaza's entire sewage system has just been physically destroyed. Every single sewage processing plant has been physically destroyed in Gaza. Most of the sewage drainage system has been disrupted, filled in, or just torn apart. And even the sewage pumps, 70% of them have been destroyed, and the other 30% are offline because they run on fuel. So, in other words, this is just a total disaster of a hospital. Forget sterility, nothing's even clean. And I mentioned how overcrowded the hospital was. Well, the first 3 days that I was there, I created a nursing-led wound care team so that we could find, because people were dying of wound sepsis and nobody was really managing these wounds. So, there's military hardware being fired at these people, so they have serious wounds that need tending to. And we actually went around, and it took about 3 days. We eventually found there were about 250 people in the hospital who needed daily operative wound care, meaning they needed to be taken from wherever they were, anesthetized in an operating room, cut on, and then sent back, and then probably do that again 2 or 3 days later. There's only 4 operating rooms at European Hospital. How are you possibly going to do this for 250 people? It's just completely impossible. And furthermore, there's 2 to 3 mass casualty events happening every day where there's tons of emergency surgery coming out of that. So actually, it's a pretty unusual thing. I've never had to do this anywhere else, but I actually started stealing ketamine. It's a dissociative anesthetic where you'll still breathe when you get it, but you won't feel pain. So I started stealing that and just using it on the floor for patients so that I could debride their wounds, because otherwise, again, like I said, everyone was just dying of wound sepsis. I started stealing it from the anesthetic card and just taking it out to the ward. Now, I do my own conscious sedation. I do my own bedside anesthesia here in the States, so it wasn't like I was inventing something. But obviously, you don't normally do it on the middle of the ward where there's cats and children running around and everything's filthy. So those 2 cases, I think, really illustrate a lot of what's been done to the Gaza Strip. And I just want to emphasize, we can blame the Israelis all we want, but we are the ones responsible for it. In fact, Pastor Will mentioned that despite the horrendous circumstances, we do find community in each other, or coming together in those circumstances. And one of the reasons is because we're the ones responsible for it, and we feel that, even if we have a hard time articulating it sometimes. And like Mark mentioned, that the charge of anti-Semitism is being used to silence, you said, Palestinian voices. I actually disagree with you. I think the charge of anti-Semitism is being used to silence American voices, because most Americans have want nothing to do with this whatsoever. It's absolutely horrendous slaughter of a population that's half children. And it's not something that we have to deal with, and that's why Jewish Voice for Peace and other such groups are so important, But, I guess I'll just end on this little note. There was if Gaza is going to exist as a political and social entity that actually, continues to function by next year, eventually some kind of healthcare system will have to be rebuilt there. And Americans are the ones that are going to decide whether or not that happens. The Palestinians don't have much say in the matter. And I think there's kind of 2 options for what can happen. There was I lived in an outlying area of the hospital. It's called the Midan. And behind the nurses' station there was a sign that said, enter this place with love and leave with a beautiful smile is a nice kind of motivational poster, you know. They had written it in English because they knew all the internationals lived in that part of the place, but they had it in Arabic as well. And that's one option, hope for the future, for a society full of children, something to rebuild. You know, we can leave with a beautiful smile eventually. But the other sign that I saw at European was graffiti that was outside of Jury's room. And it said, "In Gaza, we don't care anymore about anything." And you can understand that too. You know, you can understand the dramatic level of deprivation that these people have been dealing with, not since October 7th of 2023, but really since about 2007. It was pretty bad before then, but 2007 is when it really became a charnel house. And we just don't have to participate in pushing Gaza to the second one. All we have to do is stop sending Israel the bombs that it's using to destroy this place. And I wish I could say that it was a problem with the Trump administration. It certainly is now, but it was just as bad under Biden. I shouldn't say just as bad. It was almost as bad under Biden. It was certainly bad enough under Biden and Harris. And it kind of just illustrates something about our own society, which is that we don't actually have a major political party that is opposed to what is widely understood to be genocide. That's pretty shocking. You know, we live in a perfectly free country. Most of us can go out and do, you know, most of the people here are probably relatively privileged like me, and we can go do whatever we want, and yet something that, you know, 80% of the country is opposed to is still happening. That's pretty shocking. But it does tell us that, you know, we can come out of this with a beautiful smile in the end, I hope, but only if we work together to do it. So I don't know if that was useful or not, but hopefully maybe we can talk with each other and figure out what else people can learn. Yeah. I think there's microphones over there if anybody has a question or a comment or anything. Please, if anybody.
Can you talk a little bit about, because this is something that just really, I mean, I'm a nurse, and what hit me though is you can stop that bleeding, but you're stopping the bleeding on a patient that is deprived, that is malnourished, and then you're putting them in a situation where if they're going to heal, they need food, they need antibiotics, they need all of these things that do not exist.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things to understand about Gaza, Ukraine was the worst place in the world for attacks on healthcare prior to October 7th of 2023. The worst place for attacks in armed conflict. And I've worked in Ukraine, so I've met people who've been in hospitals that have been attacked. A friend of mine was at a children's hospital in Kyiv when it was attacked, for example. But it doesn't even remotely compare to what's going on in the Gaza Strip. In Gaza, it's not a hospital that's been attacked or a bomb went off near a hospital or a guy was shot near a hospital. The entire healthcare system has been completely and totally destroyed, almost down to the roots. I was just looking at the numbers before I came here, about something like, it depends on how you count a healthcare worker, but it doesn't really matter. Something like 1,500 healthcare workers in Gaza have been killed since October 7th of 2023. It's actually to the point now where I get like 2 or 3 notices a day of somebody that I know who just died. And I shouldn't say died, who was killed. And a healthcare system is the people like you that run it. It's not the building, it's not the, it's the people that run it. And the killing of healthcare workers in Gaza has hardly been at random. It has been the most senior people, the most senior, not just doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, x-ray technicians, literally everybody, even the engineers that work in the hospital and make it, the biomed engineers that make it work. It's really a shocking thing. On top of the killing, or what I call the culling of Gaza's healthcare workforce, the attack on the physical plant of Gaza's hospital system is just incredible. Every single hospital in Gaza has been attacked physically at some point. Every single one has been all the patients have been forcibly expelled from it at some point. And it just makes it, it's impossible for the place to work. When I was at Nasser Medical Complex, there was still Hebrew graffiti all over the place. The hospital only kind of had one can of paint, so they decided to paint over the graffiti in the children's ward, so they didn't have to keep looking at it and be reminded of what was going on. But everybody else, had to, some of it was just military markings, like this door is cleared, but also, a lot of it was also sexually explicit stuff and these crazy things. So that's the healthcare system itself. But then, like you said, patients don't just heal because we put things back together on them, or because they have a good nurse, or so they know they need food. I mean, that's to talk about healthcare provision in a land that is being starved, and it quite literally is being starved. I don't know if people don't watch the news, but the deaths from starvation are becoming so common now that they're actually being picked up by the healthcare system that still exists, which is extremely uncommon in a famine. And you just kind of imagine when you're in the middle of a famine, you probably don't have a great healthcare system. Those two things just don't really go together usually. And so yeah, starvation deaths are not usually picked up by a medical system, but now they are. Now they are being. Even the few hospitals that remain and actually are able to communicate with the outside world. I think Shifa, I think it's just Shifa, either Indonesian or not Kamal Adwan, Indonesian, and Nasser Medical Complex, which I think are the only three of any significance. They are, or I guess the Oxfam Martyrs Hospital as well. They're reporting 20 to 30 starvation deaths every day now, and it's not. The starvation deaths that happened last year that were reported, I'm quite sure there were hundreds, if not thousands, that weren't reported, but that's sticking to what we actually know. The ones that were reported were mostly children who had some kind of genetic problem. They were born with cystic fibrosis or something like that. Not that they should be allowed to die, but obviously they're much more vulnerable to starvation. But now we just have normal 14-year-old boys dying of starvation. I mean, like, some of you probably have a 14-year-old kid. You can imagine if you released him somewhere, he wouldn't die of starvation. It's not like, a kid is going to figure out a way to eat some way. It's because there's no food. There's just no food left in Gaza. The UN is able to bring in somewhere between 1 dozen and 2 dozen trucks, which just means like the 18-wheeler that you see on the side of the road, every day, which obviously for 2 million severely malnourished people is hardly enough to even keep people alive. It is not enough to keep people alive, and that's what we're seeing. And yeah, like you said, there's no way to heal wounds. Well, like especially, we had a young man, probably 30 years old, who was shot by other Palestinians when I was at European Hospital because he was stealing food, and there's no police force anymore. So apparently he got beat up the first time, he got beat up the second time, he got shot the third time. But the people who shot him brought him to the emergency room, and so we fixed him up, and I was able to stop him from bleeding. He was shot in his liver and his inferior vena cava, so it was actually a remarkable save. It took again like 6 or 7 surgeons working over the course of 3 days, almost continuously, to save him, and we did stop him from bleeding to death. But to heal his wounds was a very different matter. He had all sorts of surgical complications, and I actually don't know if he lived or not because we had to leave Gaza at that point. But so yeah, no, the malnutrition basically makes talking about surgical or medical success just silly. I totally agree with you.
I forgot one of the questions I had, but the one I remember is, can you talk about the fact not only are medical providers being killed, they're also being detained and tortured. And I've read a little bit about this in some of the Mondeweiss and other publications. So is there anything you can share about that? Maybe there isn't, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, so when I got to European, again, my first trip to Gaza, I noticed that the people in Khan Yunis were still relatively well fed. They were not starving. But then it was actually the healthcare workers who were more gaunt than the patients. And I couldn't figure this out. As normally, healthcare workers are privileged people, relatively. I mean, even nobody's all that privileged in Gaza. But sorry, I don't want this thing to fall off. Nobody's that privileged in Gaza, but usually healthcare workers are eating. Usually the hospital can provide a meal or something like that. It turned out actually most of them had been taken from Shifa Hospital or Indonesian, one of the hospitals in the north, and they were in Israeli prisons and torture camps like Tamar, the nurse that I mentioned was. And then when they were let go in the south. So they just walked to European hospital and started working again, but they had probably also been fed a juice box every day or every other day for the duration of their imprisonment. And when I got to Nasser Medical Complex, that was the second time I went there. I actually spent a whole lot of time with a general surgeon named Khalid Al-Ser. He's a pretty well-known Palestinian-American surgeon, or excuse me, not Palestinian. He's a pretty well-known Palestinian surgeon in Gaza, and I got to know him well enough. He's a very decent human being. He's about 10 years younger than I am. He finished his residency now about 2.5 years ago, and he was in so Nasser was, and he's always worked at Nasser Medical Complex since then. Nasser was raided in February and laid siege to, and during that time, Khalid was actually given a position of privilege by the Israelis who were occupying the hospital. And they said, look, we think we can trust you, so you're going to take care of all the patients. They literally took every patient from the hospital and put them in the dialysis ward, which obviously plenty of them died. But they put Khalid in there. They gave him 2 nurses, and they said, you take care of these patients, which of course he couldn't do. But he was allowed to move about the hospital to get things that he needed and things like that. So you could tell that they just didn't think that he was any kind of threat at all. Well, the Israelis raided again in March, and this time they decided to take Khalid. They took him, again, probably to sedate Yemen, but who knows? It's impossible for these guys to know where they are. For 7 months, he was blindfolded almost all the time, and he described some really pretty shocking treatment, but it's important to remember this is exactly in line. Like, if anybody wants to read about what is done to people, and I think they actually do mention the specific targeting of healthcare workers in these prisons. The B'Tselem, which is Israel's major human rights group, it's very good. They wrote a report called "Welcome to Hell," which is really worth reading. It's if you can get through it, it's pretty hard. But Khalid was put into an outdoor cell with a chain link fence around it, basically. Everyone in the cell, which is like 50, 60 people, they're all blindfolded. They all have to kneel on their knees 23 something hours a day. If they fall, they're beaten. If they talk, they're beaten. Randomly, and remember, they're blindfolded. Randomly, somebody throws a smoke or a sound bomb into the cage and runs in, and they just start beating people randomly. Again, everyone is still blindfolded and bound, like their hands are bound behind their backs. And then occasionally, which he said was about once a day, there's a name for the unit. I can't remember the unit that does these things. It's a prisoner extraction unit for Israeli prisons, but it doesn't matter. About once a day or once every other day, this extraction unit comes in, grabs some random person, has them stand like this up against the fence, and just beats them until they fall down. And broke people's forearms, broke some of Khalid's ribs. And remember, this guy was given a privileged position just a month before he was taken by the Israelis. He's known not to be a threat. In fact, when he had the opportunity to be a threat, he didn't take it. You know, like no Israeli soldier got killed at Nasser Hospital or even injured. So that's the kind of treatment that they're being put through. And just to be clear, it's an incredibly widespread phenomenon right now. Again, just to compare to Ukraine, which again, like I said, was the second, or what used to be the worst place in the world for conflict for healthcare workers. The percentage of the healthcare workforce that is imprisoned in Gaza compared to Ukraine is 200 times higher. And you know that's pretty outrageous. I mean, you know, it's just completely ridiculous. So no, it's a major problem, you know. And I'm in case someone's embarrassed to ask it, which I would understand, but people still hear this all the time, so I'll just mention it. I have never seen anyone from any militant group in a hospital in Gaza, and neither has anyone else. And there's a reason for it, which is that these militant groups don't really have much reason to be in the hospital. Now, do people go to a hospital when they get injured? Yeah, of course. Like on March 18th, for example, right? That's when the widespread bombing of Gaza resumed. And the bombing was targeting mostly Hamas's political upper echelon. So it's the person who was the prime minister of Gaza at the time and things like that. Of course, with their families, because that's how they do things. And so I'm sure on that day, one or two of the young men that I took care of probably were Hamas political people, but that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with seeking health care when you're wounded, right? That's the wounded, even if you could pretend that political people are combatants, which they're obviously not, even if you could pretend that they are combatants, combatants also have the right to receive health care. That's actually the oldest part of international law. You go back to the Geneva Convention of 1864. That's what it's about. It's actually about the protection of wounded combatants. It's not about civilians. Because at the time, Napoleon's armies were ravaging through Europe at the time. They just used to kill everybody when they won the battle. Well, the people said there's no reason to do that. Why don't we just let them live? That would be better. So they started doing that. But the point is there is no militarization of hospitals going on in the Gaza Strip. It's a completely outlandish lie. And it's being used to justify a lot of, I don't think the people making the claim actually believe it, but sometimes other people do, which is understandable. And, but yeah, it's a shocking crime. And it's one that our government is well aware of. And again, we need to be able to hold our own government to account for these things.
Yeah, as I understand it, Iraq had a similar problem after its two recent wars. I mean, the health infrastructure was destroyed, the clean water, the sewerage were in total ruins. Yeah. Things like cholera were starting to spread. What is the situation now in Iraq? And do you think that the situation in Gaza could be improved with a equivalent length of period of cessation of hostilities if all those infrastructures could be rebuilt again? Thanks.
No, thank you. Yeah, I'll answer the second part first. Could Gaza be rebuilt? Yeah, I'd like to find out, I guess is the best way to put it. Right now, the last estimate was, if I'm remembering correctly, that there are 53 million tons of rubble that need to be removed from the Gaza Strip, and I think the UN Environmental Program estimated that would take 30 to 40 years under the Israeli blockade, which there's no sign that that's going to be lifted. In, I believe, July of last year, the UN Environmental Program, and I think the UN satellite analysis people, they estimated that, and again, this is more than a year ago now, they estimated that there were 107 kilograms of rubble for every square meter of the Gaza Strip. So just again, gives you some sense of scale. I mean, you're talking about a massive thing. The rebuilding of Gaza is a massive undertaking, and this current attack, if you can even call it that, what the Israelis are calling Operation Gideon's Chariot. It's the first time that I guess with the Biden administration gone, they figured they don't even have to pretend to adhere to any kind of international norms or law. They just simply say that the Gideon's Chariot, the purpose of this operation is simply to destroy infrastructure. Now it's just actually quite explicit, like it's not hidden at all. In fact, if you read the Israeli the operational field reports that the IDF spokesperson's office publishes, which are available in English if you want to read them, they actually just say that the purpose of the operation in Beit Lahia was to destroy another 500 homes and to avoid contact with the enemy at all costs. Okay, it's pretty straightforward what that is. And it's just over and over and over and over again. But I don't know if I'm not an urban planner, and I don't think any urban planner has ever seen anything like this. 70% of all human-built structures in Gaza have been destroyed. The city of Rafah, your sister city, literally does not exist anymore. It's just rubble. Most of Gaza City does not exist anymore. It's just rubble. The only reason it isn't 100% is because Khan Yunis and Beit Lahia, Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah just north of it, still have about 3/4 of their buildings standing, which is rapidly being changed. And then as regards to Iraq, yeah, so Iraq, there's a really good book on this written by Hans von Spunik, I think, called The Different Kind of War. Von Spunik was the second, I believe, U.S. chosen UN head of what was called the Oil for Food program at the time. Both of the people that ran that Oil for Food program resigned, saying that it was genocidal. And this is something to keep in mind. This is hardly the first time the U.S. is, not even in our lifetimes, that the U.S. has participated in a genocide. It's very unfortunate, but it is where it is. So now Iraq's healthcare system is being rebuilt, but Iraq is still a state in absolute turmoil. Actually, right now I'm trying to organize an all-cause mortality analysis of the Gaza Strip, and one of the academics I'm working with is actually Iraqi. He's in Baghdad. Makes the time difference is a huge problem, but yeah. So Iraq, people rebuild. The Gazans. It's kind of amazing how. Actually, I'll tell you another story about Khalid. I knew he wouldn't accept a gift from me just to say thank you, because he had really been like my turnkey for the whole hospital. If I needed something, call Khalid. If I need something, call Khalid. So when I was leaving, I just wanted to give him, just give him some money, basically, because he needs it. Everybody needs it, but he had done something for me, so it's just to be nice. And so I kind of lied to him. I said, what's the appropriate way in Palestinian culture to give someone a gift? And he said, oh, well, just put it in an envelope and write a nice note on it. And I said, okay, sounds good. So then the next day I gave him his envelope, and he just refused to take it. I don't need charity. I said, no, Khalid, I told him I tried to insist that it was a wedding gift because he was going to get married, and so finally he took it. But this guy desperately needs $500. It's not. That's a question of survival for the next month for him. Still trying not to take it from people. These people don't want, and not that you were implying this. I'm just saying it. These people don't want charity. They really don't. They just want our boots off their necks, and that's a completely reasonable thing. But yeah, can it be rebuilt? I think so, or I should say I hope so. The destruction of Iraq was horrific enough. It's nothing compared to the destruction of Gaza. What was done to Fallujah is actually less severe than what was done to the Gaza Strip just since October 7th. Forget before that. The sanctions we had on Iraq, you can kind of think of it as equivalent to the Israeli blockade, the U.S. Israeli blockade of Gaza since 2007. And of course, the numbers of deaths were much higher, but that's because Iraq is a much bigger place. But the two. The history of the two is not something to overlook, like you're implying.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be with you and to listen and to hear. And I think there's no doubt in anyone's mind, hopefully tonight, the horror of what our Palestinian brothers and sisters are experiencing, and wake up every morning and pay attention, and get up the next day and pay attention again. And there's so many great groups that are calling essentially for what you're calling for. This is what our tax dollars are buying. This is the United States doing. The bloodthirst of the United States government is no surprise. It shouldn't be for any of us. And what I think I want to ask, and I'm cautious about it, but I can't not, is that even the best of the groups seem to be saying, call your congressperson. If I have to call Tammy Baldwin's office one more time, the nausea that I felt out of the assault on the girls' school today, right, overwhelms me. Calling her office is even more overwhelming to me. I am sickened by her actions. I am disgusted by her role. In any event, I've called her. And Pocan, who generally does the right thing. And every state has some people that are doing the right thing. Rashida Tlaib spoke this morning on Democracy Now! We should all be paying attention to whatever Rashida Tlaib is saying. But other than, so the answer is we need to change what's happening.
Yeah.
and how we change what's happening, how we're encouraged to change what's happening, is to call these essentially capitalist, bloodthirst people who are feeling really bad about it, but they're not going to do a goddamn thing. And so what then? You know, what then? What about mass action? Where is that happening? What would you think might make a difference? Because the electeds are hardly going to take a step.
Yeah, so we shouldn't, the frustration and the kind of just shock at realizing kind of what I said before, that we just don't act like, you know, Tammy Baldwin is billed as a progressive force in the world. I mean, and in a lot of ways she is. I mean, you know, better than Marjorie Taylor Greene or something, but at the same time, Marjorie Taylor Greene is the one introducing a resolution not to fund the Israeli army. So it's a weird time, there's no doubt about that. But, you know, as for what you can do beyond calling your congressman and senator or emailing them or whatever method of communication is definitely worthwhile. Because it's easy. It just takes 2 seconds. Like I literally, every week I copy and paste the same email to my 2 senators and my representatives, send it, and you know, it's just to register dissent, I suppose. But that's just so easy. You know, there's no excuse for not doing that. I do it on my phone while I'm doing nothing. So that's easy to do. But then people like you all, like, you know, I don't live here, but you do. The people have to get together and ask, what else can we do? And these are, I don't know in your particular political circumstances, but like I'll give you an example. I went to the Jewish Voice for Peace in Phoenix invited me out, and so I gave a talk there, and then we had the same discussion. What can we do? And the people, the two guys were there. There were 2 older men in the audience, and they said, "Yeah, we're so frustrated. What can we do? What can we do?" And I said, "Well, what have you been doing?" And they said, "Oh, well, we just got out of jail." And I said, what do you mean you just got out of jail? And so they had flown from Phoenix to the White House, you know, in D.C., because they had heard that there was a gala going on. This is under the Biden administration. They'd heard there was a gala going on, and one of them is a retired lawyer and the other is a retired physician. So they don't care if they get a misdemeanor charge and they get their licenses revoked because they don't work anymore. So they no, really, and that you know, this is not an insubstantial thing. Like if I lost my medical license, I don't honestly know what I would do. It's pretty tough to. I don't have any other skills. You know, but for them that wasn't an issue anymore. You know, so and because it was funny because in that talk they kept saying, "Oh, you're so brave for going to Gaza. You're so brave." I said, well, no, not really. I mean, it would be more of a sacrifice for me to go chain myself to the White House fence. So, you know, we have to have people from different walks of life, different professions, different cultures, you know, whatever, you know, diversity comes in all sorts of forms. But it really has a lot of power in trying to organize something that has more concrete action, you know. And you got to remember, you know, almost all of the major weapon systems that the Israelis are using come from here. And, you know, the folks at Palestine Action in the UK, if you don't know who they are, you should look them up. That kind of direct action has very serious consequences. You know, you're basically engaging in nonviolent mass action, but that's the kind that's going to get you sent to prison, and that's not a small thing. But you know, and we also, but just to, and I hear your frustration and your rage, and it's very hard not to feel it. I mean, I do too. I know I have a calm voice, but I feel it too. And one thing to remember, like you mentioned Iraq, right? When did we start committing genocide in Iraq? February of 1991, right? And that's when the Gulf War starts. After the Gulf War, the U.S. targeted almost all of Iraq's civilian infrastructure during that war. It then imposed a crushing blockade and sanctions regime that guaranteed that Saddam Hussein would stay in power for the next 10 years, which he did. Allowed the Kurds to be slaughtered, allowed the Shia in the south to be slaughtered, all under the guise of maintaining stability. And it was a kind of interesting thing. Thomas Friedman was now he's kind of this ridiculous opinion writer for the New York Times, but back then he still had a way of saying something that was useful sometimes. And one of the things he wrote about, he wrote it, I think it was an opinion piece, but I can't remember, it doesn't matter. One of the things he wrote was that explaining why the U.S. hadn't gone and overthrown Saddam Hussein like a lot of more right-wing people were calling for. And he said that the best possible outcome for the United States and Iraq, I'm quoting as best I can remember, would be an iron-fisted junta without the embarrassing name of Saddam Hussein. But we can't find one, so Saddam Hussein will have to do. Well, that's right. I mean, that's, you know, if you're trying to rule the Middle East by force, this is something we've been talking about a lot this weekend. The reason the U.S., you know, it's important to understand why the U.S., like why is the U.S. doing this in Gaza? Why did it do it in Iraq? You know, why did we do this in Syria? Why are we doing anything that we do in the Middle East? Well, the U.S. decided in, you know, after World War II, the State Department declared that the oil reserves of the Middle East are a stupendous source of strategic power and the greatest material prize in human history. And that's correct. I mean, that's pretty obvious. You know, the oil wealth is, you're talking about real money now. And there's a pretty obvious corollary to that, which is that we can't allow the Middle East states, at least the oil-producing states, to become democracies. Because of course they're not going to allow American oil corporations to fleece them if that happens. It's just transparently obvious. So we have to make sure that they stay under the dictatorships that we own. The Egyptian dictatorship, the Saudi dictatorship, Bahrain, Qatar, et cetera, et cetera. And in the 1960s, that process was kind of getting out of control. Nasser was rising up in Egypt. What's called secular Arab nationalism was really taking off. Syria and Egypt formed the United Arab Republic, I think it was called, is that right? And basically formed a military bloc against the Israelis mostly with Russian arms. And at the same time, the U.S. is bogged down in Vietnam, right? Well, 1967 war comes along, and the Israelis show how you treat third world upstarts. You just kick them in the teeth, you take over half of their territory, and you expel their entire civilian population from the Sinai Peninsula, and start building all Jewish towns there. No niceties about international law and no other nonsense. Just do it. Just take what you want by force. Well, that was inspiring to the American elite in a lot of ways, because that's the kind of power they aspire to. And so that's when the U.S.-Israel special relationship starts. And the Israelis do, I shouldn't say the Israelis, I shouldn't be imprecise about these things. The Israeli government and the Israeli military do a lot of things in the Middle East. They assassinate people, they intimidate people, they do all sorts of stuff that the U.S. doesn't want its fingerprints on. And you know, there was actually, like you mentioned that anti-Semitism itself, like not the abuse of it, but the reality of it is really quite real. And you mentioned that the Israeli government is a major source of it. I actually think the American government is another major source of it, precisely for this reason. You know, there's a young Jewish woman named Lily Greenberg Call. She was a Biden administration political appointee, and I think at the Department of Interior, if I remember correctly. And she resigned publicly from her position. It was a political position that she'd been appointed to because of her work on the Biden campaign. And she resigned publicly, I think while I was in Gaza the first time, or at least that's where I read about her resignation. But she resigned publicly, and in her letter, she wrote that what's going on in Gaza just horrifies her. She can't support this. But she also wrote something else that was really, really interesting. She said, I also, and I'm quoting as best I can remember, but I also cannot countenance the work of an administration that is making Jews the face of the American war machine. That's correct. In other words, the Biden administration was just scapegoating Jews. The same thing Hitler did, just instead of saying they're terrible, saying they're so great, so we got some functional outcome. And so in this regard, this is the outcome of a very long-term project, is what I'm trying to point out. And it's having some really horrifying consequences right now, and you can see how it could have even more horrifying consequences in the future. But then again, kind of remember the situation of like Iraq, for example. Well, the Iraqis ended up freeing themselves from us. I mean, we didn't do hardly anything about it. The East Timorese ended up freeing themselves from us and the Indonesians. That we didn't hardly do anything about it. And that, you know, Ford and Kissinger went to Jakarta in '75, I guess. So the Indonesians invaded like in December of '75, if I'm remembering correctly. The U.S. backed the invasion all the way. The Indonesians killed about a third of the population by the 1990s. They were running concentration camps. They were running rape camps. I mean, just absolutely the most horrific thing is basically Gaza, just even worse, if you can believe it. And in 1999, the UN finally managed to organize a vote over whether or not the East Timorese wanted independence from the Indonesians. The whole world was hoping they would vote yes, remarkably because they knew what would happen to them if they did vote yes. They voted yes, and the Indonesians went on another huge killing spree, but finally Clinton called the Indonesian generals and just said, the game's over. The whole world is pissed off about this, game's up. So they withdrew the next day. Well, that's the power of the United States. So these things take a long time to solve because fundamentally we haven't dealt with the actual problem, which is us. You know, I know it's uncomfortable to look in the mirror about that, but it's not. We are the source of these problems. Anybody who says the U.S. is the only source of problems in the world would be crazy, but we're the source of a lot of them. And again, we just don't have to be. Do any of you, can anyone here articulate how they benefited from the destruction of East Timor? And do you own an arms company? If you do, that's pretty much the only way. You know, it's not. These are not small things. You know, and one thing to also kind of realize is that there's actually a good study of the British Empire that was done that asked, was the empire worth it, just in monetary costs, forget morality. And what they found is that the British spent about as much money policing the empire as they took out of it, resources, trade, whatever else. But it didn't, but the benefits flowed in one direction. The poor paid for it and the rich benefited from it. So in other words, the British Empire was a form of class warfare. I don't know of a study in the US, but I suspect it's pretty much the same. And so that's, you know. So again, these you talked about intersectionality as well. It's kind of a fancy word, but it's but you know, yeah, these struggles really are all very connected. It's not that hard to see that if you have the time to sit down in a room like this, like privileged people like us do, and I think we have an obligation to do something about it in that case. But there's a lot that can be done, but I just can't tell you what it is because I don't know. There's plenty of excellent models. Again, Palestine Action. Mass movements with mass demonstrations with JVP or Code Pink, or there was this what was called No Kings or something. That pretty milquetoast thing, I know, but still, it was lots of people came out for it. You can see that people want to do something, they just don't know what, and they're scared. But when you're surrounded by like-minded people, you'll be less scared. So. Yeah.
Hi, thanks so much for being here and sharing your experiences with us. I'm wondering what in your background, personal, professionally, led you to decide to do this type of work in the places before you went to Gaza, and also what that decision was like to go to Gaza twice. And I guess my kind of connected question is, can you give us some window into the logistics of you as an American doctor going there? Like, what type of protections do you have? Are you treated differently? Anything about that whole experience would be.
Yeah, sure. So my own story. I don't like to personalize things too much, but I actually was. So I started college in October of 2000 in Baltimore, and that was when I guess I started earlier in 2000, but in October of 2000, the second Intifada broke out, so it was just the big thing on campus. And I got involved in groups like Amnesty International and whatever else. So and then I stuck with it after college. Most people kind of move on to something more interesting in life, but I stuck with it. I was editing a book at the time on the topic, and I wanted some more time to explore other things, because I had gone to college thinking I'd be a doctor because my dad's a doctor. But then I thought, well, maybe law or maybe history is more important. I don't know. I just didn't know. So I went and lived in Israel for about a year, actually. I lived in Haifa and worked with an Arab-Jewish cooperative there. And during that time, I would tour around in the West Bank, on the weekends. And I kept running into Palestinian and also Israeli physicians. They're mostly Palestinian, obviously, but a large number of Israeli physicians as well who are working for Physicians for Human Rights Israel, or working with Physicians for Human Rights Israel. And they just were very inspiring. Honestly, that's the only thing I can tell you. so I kind of decided to be a doctor in Palestine. So it's just been natural to go abroad and do that kind of work. And then when I when I started my surgery residency in Boston, I thought I was going to be a pediatric surgeon, but then I met pediatric surgeons and I didn't like them very much. So I went on to be a trauma surgeon instead. And so then when you're a trauma surgeon, it makes sense to go to places where trauma is happening. So that's really the only reason. I can't say I particularly enjoy going to the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's there's a lot of solidarity, and you feel like you've done absolutely nothing when you leave, just because the burden, and you have, like up here, you have, but here you don't. The burden of disease and the burden of just, not even disease, just deprivation is just so extreme. And like I still remember that on March 18th, I mentioned that's when the widespread bombing resumed. And the first person I found that day that could live was this little girl named Sham. She was 5, and I just remember I just had to hold her jaw open for a little while the nurses got some stuff set up so we could take care of her. And she had a wound here. The shrapnel had traveled through her brain, but she actually ended up doing fine, because 5-year-olds are awesome. And there was this little trickle of blood coming out of her while I was staring at her, holding her jaw open. I just remember thinking, like, did I pay for the shrapnel that's in her head, or did my neighbor, or did my other neighbor? And it was that's the kind of thing that motivates me to keep going back to Gaza specifically. I was actually supposed to be in the West Bank in September, but that was a Harvard project, and they're terrified of the Trump administration now, willingly or otherwise. But so I'm trying to go back in October now. But no, in terms of the logistics of getting there, it's a complete disaster. So everything is made. So when I went the first time, I went through the Rafah crossing, which meant we flew to Cairo and then went across the Sinai and went into the southern end of Gaza. And when you did that, you could basically take whatever you wanted. I mean, not literally whatever you wanted, but any kind of medical supplies that you wanted, you just packed and took. So I actually flew like 1,100 pounds of stuff on British Airways, which is obviously not an efficient way of doing anything, but that was the only way of doing it. I don't know Egyptians, so I can't buy stuff there. But then we packed that stuff into a bunch of vans, drove from Cairo all the way across the Sinai Peninsula, which is like 12 hours because it's a heavily militarized area. The Sinai is basically an open revolt against the Egyptian government. And then at Rafah, we just took all this stuff in. And no one, the Egyptians didn't deny anybody the right to go through this crossing. They did check all of this with the Israelis or the Americans. I'm not sure. It's kind of opaque what happens there. But it was pretty clear that the Israelis had final say in who actually gets to go in. But at that time, nobody was denied. One guy broke it. We were supposed to be 14. We ended up being 13 because one guy broke his foot in Cairo's airport, so we just went back home. But so all 13 of us went in, and we all worked, and then we left. But when I went back the second time, Rafah had been taken, and the Israeli, not just the Rafah gate hadn't just been taken, but it's been physically destroyed, so you can't go in that way. And so now you have to fly to Jordan, and you fly to Amman. You have to get there. So the way this actually works is that we can't work with the Ministry of Health in Gaza like I can work with the Ministry of Health in Ukraine, because it's part of Hamas, so it's run by Hamas, so they'll say I'm a terrorist when I come back. So instead you have to go through the WHO, and the World Health Organization organizes these things called emergency medical teams, EMTs. And so you apply through an NGO, like I went with Palestinian American Medical Association the first time, and then with MedGlobal the second time. And they just give your name to the WHO. The WHO figures out what specialties they want, or what specialists they want, I should say. And then you fly to Amman. So 3 months ahead of time, the WHO gives everyone's name and information to COGAT. It's the Israeli military office that's meant to coordinate between the military and humanitarian organizations. And and everybody, literally everybody, gets pre-approval. Like when you get your credit card application, you've been pre-approved. So then you fly to Amman, and 6 to 12 hours before you're going to go in, you're told if you got final approval or not, which only 50% of people get. And it's absolutely ridiculous, because you can imagine how frustrating this is. Like for me, I happen to have a long history of working there, so I'm going to keep trying to work there. But for someone who doesn't, and someone who's just like, I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, whatever, I just want to work, I see how bad this is, I want to go work there. When they learn that they have a 50% chance of getting rejected, and now they've taken off 3 or 4 weeks, usually 4 or 5 weeks actually, off of work, You tell your partner you love them, you arrange your will. No, really, I mean, because it's not that you're likely to get killed there, but there is a non-zero chance. Like I was about 2 minutes away from getting killed at Nasser Hospital, actually. And so it's not a minor, like going to the Gaza Strip, I'm not given to false modesty, it's not a minor thing to go there, it's pretty frightening, honestly. And, but yeah, so, and then just to emphasize how arbitrary it is, I'm pretty sure that I'm the best known physician who's gone to the Gaza Strip, like the person who's best known for doing that in the States. And I was given admission. And now I'm a man of military age. You certainly couldn't, not for long, but still. And then the next most well-known person is probably Tammy Abu Ghnaim. She was with me on the trip, actually, and she was admitted. So the two people who have been like most vocal, most in the media, most talking to community events, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, were admitted. The three people who were rejected is an American Army veteran and 100-pound woman named Bing Lee, who has been in Gaza before and obviously caused no security problems. Wilhelmi Mase, who is I think 60-year-old Tanzanian immigrant to the U.S., an ICU nurse, and has also worked in Gaza before. And John Kaler, who's a 78-year-old pediatrician with 2 fake knees, who has also worked in Gaza before. So, what is it's just completely arbitrary and random. I would swear that they're just flipping a coin just to see. Like Tammy and I thought it was kind of obvious that the two of us weren't going to get in, and we were actually getting the email that you get was actually delayed. It's usually supposed to come in at 6 or 7 p.m., but it came in at midnight. So we were just sitting there thinking, oh God, they're just deciding how many people to reject. But we were sure that she and I would be rejected and everyone else would get in. It turned out to be the exact opposite. So, So it's frustrating, and the whole point is that, you're just trying to frustrate people and have them say, well, why wouldn't I just go work literally anywhere else in the world because there's plenty of other people that need help. It's not, and Gaza is certainly the worst place in the world right now, but it's not the only bad place. And, then I would also if I go somewhere else, I'll be able to eat whenever I want. I won't be bombed, it's not minor things, so. So yeah, the healthcare system, or and then was I treated differently? Yeah, the Palestinians did everything they possibly could to make me comfortable. It's an incredibly welcoming culture. This is a funny story. I don't know if it matters or not, but I'll tell a story. Mark Perlmutter was there with me, and you can tell by his last name he's Jewish. He's a Jewish American hand surgeon in North Carolina. He and I went. We went together the first time, and we happened to be there together the second time. And the first time we got in the van in Cairo, and we knew it was a long journey. And so I was talking to Mark. He and I were the only 2 people in that van. The rest was just filled up with luggage. And I was talking to him, and he said, Feroze, I am just a little bit nervous about going because I'm Jewish, and which is understandable. And so I said, Mark, I know you're not going to, you won't believe me about this, but you are going to a place where you will never meet less anti-Semitic people than the people that live in this place. I don't really understand why. That doesn't make sense to me. But the Palestinians, I think, just as actually kind of an unusual form of resistance, have refused to forget that Jews are actually a major part of Palestinian culture. It's Jerusalem, right? So it's really quite interesting. He was like, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? So the first day, we got there late at night, and then the next morning we got up, went on kind of a tour of the hospital, and then went about working. So he went and met some of the orthopedic residents and surgeons there, met the administration, et cetera, et cetera. And when we it was Ramadan that time too, and so when we came together for the evening meal, iftar, I said, Mark, how'd it go? Now Mark is 70 years old now. He just turned 70. Back then he was 69, I suppose. And I asked, how did it go? And he was Feroze, I'm honestly just kind of embarrassed. My whole life I was taught these people hate me and want to kill me. And I started off by saying, hi, I'm Mark from the United States. And they said, oh, welcome, Mark. We really love when Americans come. Thank you. Thank you for coming. You're welcome. So then I said, I'm Mark Perlmutter from the United States. And a few people would pick up that it was a Jewish name, and they would say, oh, welcome, welcome. We're really glad you're here. And then he got bold enough to say, I'm Mark Perlmutter, and I'm Jewish and I'm from the United States. And that was when people said, oh my goodness, welcome, thank you so much. They would kiss him on the cheek and they would hold his hand and they would want to tell him these stories about this. You know, my grandmother used to tell me about this nice family that lived down the street from them in Jerusalem and they used to watch each other's kids. Like, this is, it's a weird thing, but it's, or I shouldn't say it's a weird thing, it's a very uplifting thing actually, but it's, and I would never have believed this before I went there if somebody had told me, because it honestly just, it's kind of hard to believe that the culture can be that strong, and that despite the fact that, you know, every death machine that drops things on them has a Star of David on it, they refuse to forget that Jews are actually a part of the culture, a part of the fabric of their society, and they actually want that part back, you know, they do. Sorry, I forget why I started talking about that, but or you were talking about American physicians being treated differently, you know, but yeah, you know, it's just, these are, so yeah, how are we treated differently? Well, we're just treated better. In fact, when Palestinian Americans came, they were like, yeah, we want to talk to the Jewish guy, leave us alone, you know. But you know, in terms of how the Israelis treated us, I mean, I have not encountered Israeli soldiers in Gaza. In the West Bank, I'll tell you, I wasn't a doctor then, to be fair, but in the West Bank, I've been hit by Israeli soldiers. I've been thrown on the ground by them. Any American who's gone there can tell you a story about them. Yesterday, somebody told me, like, oh, can you help the very nice Palestinian, I think she had been with, like, the International Solidarity Movement or something, I don't know, but she had had a skull fracture from being beaten, and she's an old woman. And by settlers, and so she said there's a very nice Palestinian doctor who helped me when I had my skull broken in the West Bank by settlers. So yeah, you know, it's one of the unfortunate things is that if you a lot of people, especially healthcare providers, reach out to me and they just say, I want to volunteer in Gaza. How can I do that? And I always tell them they should. I think it's a good thing to do. The more people that do it, the better. But I do tell them that, like, look, this isn't like going anywhere else. If the Israelis want to kill you, and usually they don't, like, it's just too much of a hassle and they're going to have to explain it to somebody, and well, yeah. But if they want to kill you, they will, and they will 100% get away with it. You know, like, I mean, I think Rachel Corey's from this town, right? Like, you know, you all probably know her name. There's actually, I actually met a lot of, still, the people are still naming their young girls Rachel in Gaza. But there is, it kind of shows you that even the purpose of none of this is to keep American citizens safe. Actually, I'll tell you, on March 23rd, like I mentioned, I had a patient named Ibrahim. He was a 16-year-old boy, and he was March 23rd of this year, and he was he was ready to go home, and it was after iftar. So I said, well, we'll just discharge him the next day. So I was on my way to his room. Just to explain to his family one last time, because he had a colostomy and he did other stuff. So just to explain how to take care of it when he goes home in the morning, and we'll see him in the clinic. And if he can't get into the clinic, come to the emergency room, just standard stuff. And on my way to his room, like, I was literally about 2 minutes away from his room when it exploded. The Israelis fired a missile at it to kill him and the guy, well, probably to kill the other guy in the room, Ismail Barhoum. They were distant cousins. So I knew my family would find out about this, so I texted them and just said, yeah, the hospital was bombed, but I'm fine, don't worry. And then I put on, what do they call it now, X, Twitter. I was a 17-year-old patient of mine was just killed at European hospital. I'm fine, for people who care. And somehow the US Embassy found this tweet. And so they called me. And it was the 972. 972 is Israel's area code, or country code. So they called me, and I saw it's a 972 number. I was like, it's probably some random guy who's going to scream at me, but okay, fine. So I picked it up, and it was the embassy. And the lady says, we saw your tweet. It's ridiculous. We saw your tweet, and we just want to make sure you're okay. And I said, well, you know I'm okay. You saw the tweet, right? But you know, if you want to make sure I stay okay, maybe you could ask the Israelis not to bomb Nasser Hospital again. And I'm not I swear to God this is true. She said, oh, sorry, that's really not our role. And so, you know, how do doctors get treated differently by the Palestinians? One way, and by the US and Israel another. And again, this kind of goes back to that question of solidarity. You know, it's very easy. I could criticize the US government in my room all day long, right? But I do have this skill set that I can go and take there, and professional judgment and things like that, that I can institute there, and that can help me help other people understand what's going on, in some kind of unusual way. So I feel obligated to do that, but but it just shows you that it's, even your own government really isn't on your side, and we have to, again, this just should motivate us to change that, because it's not some alien entity that we can't control. We can control it, we just haven't figured out how yet.
We are, sorry about that. We are right around 8:30. I will let Dr. Sidhwa say when he is done answering questions, if that's all right.
Yeah.
But just recognizing that some people may start
Please don't feel bad
moving
if you have to
out.
leave,
You should feel comfortable as you need to file out. But I just want to take the opportunity before too many people do that to appreciate again showing up and participating. It is, I suppose, an act of hope. I suppose you would agree to show up, to see each other, to hear the stories, and to meditate on how those stories can be spoken, and how the care and love that we have for people in these situations can be embodied in transformative ways. So thank you. I appreciate you all being here. And then I can continue taking some questions, and you tell me when.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Great.
Mark, is there any more water anywhere?
Thank you, Dr. Sidhwa. One of the messages that I've gotten from you and from Mark and from others who organize is that the need for us to unite and do something. That we actually need a nonviolent revolution that puts peace and nonviolence at the center of what we're doing. And towards that end, on Nagasaki Day, which many of you will know is August 9th, 80 years from the last time that atomic weaponry was used on civilian populations, we're having a peace summit, and we're inviting all kinds of peace groups, from Jewish Voice to Peace for Peace, Veterans for Peace, Interfaith Coalition Interfaith Working, lots of peace groups together to kind of figure out. But I think it's time for all of us that are working with groups, whether it's the Working Families Party, the Poor People's Campaign, we've got to build a united people's movement. And I'd love to hear your reflections on a call for unity. If all of these various groups and parties could all just say, we need a nonviolent revolution that puts people, peace, and our planet at the center of all that we do. Thank you for your reflections on that, and thank you so much for all that you do.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think, just like we said before, it's just necessary for us to all work together. There's no way around it. Half the country is so disgusted by the political system that it doesn't bother cashing its free vote. The other half of the country is divided between these two wings of a business party, and that's not going to be useful for human survival. And there's limits to what the planet can take, like you said. There's limits to what human beings can take too. So I couldn't agree more. People, oh, thanks, man, appreciate it. Nothing that's worth doing you can't do it alone. Everything that's worth doing has to be done collectively, and that's been true forever, not just recently. And this is another thing we've talked about a lot this weekend, is like having different people from different walks of life, different professions, different jobs, different cultures. Having all those people in the same room, and not only learning about each other and being in community together, which is nice, but actually coming up with some sort of plan to do something. There's that's the first time you do something, it probably won't work. Don't get frustrated, just do something else. I don't know if anybody here is a member of a labor union, but there are plenty of dead bodies buried in Colorado and Nevada and other mining towns, or towns that were old mining towns, those dead bodies are the reason you can join a union. It's not, none of this, there's freedom of association in the Constitution, but it didn't mean anything until people were willing to die for it. So, hopefully we don't have to get to that point. But, and the other thing is, again, this is Madison, Wisconsin. Most of the people here are probably relatively privileged, at least the people in this room. And that's something we should take advantage of. We don't have to accept that the whole world has to be, become unlivable from climate change. We don't have to accept that our own government funds this massive slaughter that we all watch live on, Instagram and whatever else. We just don't have to accept that. We have formal democratic mechanisms that people have, again, plenty of people died for. Then we should take advantage of them. I think we're dishonoring their memory by not doing that. Yeah. And that's all. Sorry, just to maybe put too fine a point on it, but that's why when people often say, "Feroze, you're just obsessed with Palestine." Thank you. People just say you're just obsessed with Palestine. I actually don't really care one way or the other about Palestine itself. I don't care about Palestinians more than other people, for example. That doesn't make any sense. I care about us. Like, we're the ones doing these things. I want my own country to be morally better than it is, and that's the issue. It's just straightforward. I don't want to be involved in the killing of kids. Like I said, when I was looking at Sham's little face and she's got this blood trickling out of her, I'm just wondering, who paid for the shrapnel? I know it wasn't the Israelis that dropped it on her, it was me. That sucks. There's just that we don't have to accept that. We just don't.
Father, will you just remind folks as they're leaving that the QR code and space for supporting Mecca?
Yeah, the Middle East Children's Alliance, scan the QR code, and you can donate money to them. And they do great work. And just to be clear, charity is nice, but we actually owe these people reparations. So giving them, even if you can just give them $5, that's really, it's really, it's something. It's not enough, we all know that, but it's something, and it makes a difference.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the man that you treated, the nurse, and you described him, you said you left him alive in a wheelchair. And my mind just went to his mental health needs and the entire Gaza Strip's mental health needs and generational trauma to come now from what's happening. So if you can address that, and I don't know if there are people going to Gaza to address mental health needs.
Yeah, going right now to do that, I seriously doubt it. There was a day. This is at European Hospital also. There was a day where I was walking back into the Maidan where we lived, and people were having almost like a concert. Like there was some kid who had shown up who was kind of a well-known singer of like religious songs, in Khan Yunis, and so they had said, "Oh, come sing for us, come sing for us." So they just sat around. It was just like 20 people or something. They were just sitting around singing. And I can't understand the songs, obviously, but it was obvious that these were like famous communal songs because everyone was singing along with them quietly. And in the meantime, there's bombs going off in the background. The whole hospital is shaking, literally. And, there's not, it's kind of weird, but you kind of learn to ignore bombing after a while. It's like after 2 days, I was sleeping just fine at night at European Hospital. It was very, very odd, honestly. There were some bombs that actually threw me out of bed. That was a different matter. But the ones that just swayed the hospital or were really loud, you just start to ignore them. There's a Palestinian, I should have looked up his name because I couldn't remember it yesterday, but there was a Palestinian psychiatrist who I think has passed away, but people used to ask him about mental health and PTSD in Palestine, and especially in Gaza, and because I think he worked in Gaza City. And he used to say there's no PTSD in Gaza. There's continuous traumatic stress in Gaza. It never goes away, And it's not the, it's kind of like I mentioned about Tamar, the nurse. When he was shot in the knee, he can get over that. I mean, the physical symptoms will go away after a while. Even if he has to have his leg amputated, he'll get over that. And the moment of victimization is past, and he'll go on with his life. But what was done next is very different. Very, very different. You can't be tortured and tormented for 1.5 months starved, beaten. This is just totally. That's a very hard thing to recover from, no matter how much mental health capacity you're exposed to. So the answer is, honestly, I don't know what the prospects are for reviving Gaza's mental health. There's a huge number of orphans in Gaza now. There's a huge number of children who are the only survivors of an entire family. The whole society has been ripped apart, and kind of the same way that for example, the Nazi Holocaust or the Irish potato famine, or these are culturally dramatic moments, but in Palestine it's been one after another after another after another. And I don't think when this time, again, I'm not Palestinian, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I don't think when this time is remembered, it's just going to be remembered after October 7th. I think it's going to be remembered starting in like 2006 or 7. That's when the destruction of Gaza really took off. After Operation Protective Edge, which was 2014, 12 years ago now, Peter, I forget his last name now, he was the head of the International Committee for the Red Cross, whose job is just to go to terrible war zones and see them. He went there, again, this is 2014, he went into Gaza and he said, I've never in my life seen destruction like this, never, nowhere else. He's been in Iraq, he's been in Syria, it's nothing, nothing even remotely approximating it. So I think it is going to be very hard to recover people's mental health in such a severely degraded and deprived society of where there's no food, there's no water. So it's an important question. I don't want to pretend it's not, but it's just, unfortunately, there's just way more that there is going to be intergenerational trauma. There's no doubt about it, and it would be nice if it could be addressed. But first, we better get people to survive to the next generation, and then we'll talk about it. The same thing happened with Holocaust survivors, incidentally. There's a lot of study, which most of it's very good actually, of the intergenerational trauma that Holocaust survivors pass down to their children for obvious reasons. There's an American political scientist named Norman Finkelstein who's quite active in the Israel-Palestine thing, and he wrote a memoir. I don't know if it was ever published, but I think it was called Haunted House. And he talks about these moments. His mother had survived Bergen-Belsen, and his father had survived Auschwitz and the Auschwitz Death March. And he talked about just all of the bizarre things that would happen in his house that didn't happen in anybody else's house, and it's just these things keep happening. So it is something that will have to be addressed, but there has to be somebody alive to address it with first, I guess.
Hi. So for those of us who over here, hi. For those of us who keep an eye on the news coming from Gaza, just seeing the rising death toll, day after day can kind of begin to lose meaning in terms of actually processing that quantity. So for people like us, to help us understand, to what do you attribute the genocide under the Trump administration, or even Trump's contribution to the genocide, being worse than Biden's? Is that based on death toll, destruction of infrastructure, the increased transparency of the IDF's intent, like you mentioned earlier, or if not those, then what
really
exactly?
That last thing, honestly, is just the total. I just wrote an article for the Council on Foreign Relations. They have a little health-related or global health-related journal called Think Global Health. I wrote it with Leonard Rubinstein. He's the world's leading expert in international humanitarian law related to attacks on healthcare in conflict. And what we pointed out is that, I can't remember if this made it into the final cut of the article or not, but it doesn't matter. Under Biden, the Israelis would at least pretend that what they were doing was compatible with international law. They would say it was obvious that they were just transparently wrong, but they would at least pretend that it was. Now they don't even bother, and that is a meaningless thing. It doesn't actually matter that much. If a bomb, when a kid gets blown up, it doesn't matter what the Israelis say about it afterwards, right? Or what the U.S. State Department says about it afterwards. Nevertheless, it's just a step in the wrong direction. But I would say logistically, in any concrete sense, no, I completely agree with you. They've been just as bad one as the other. There's additional things about the Trump administration of the lunacy of just attacking immigrants in the streets and stuff like that, attacking random students because they co-authored a student newspaper op-ed or something, some crazy thing. But in terms of the specific question of the destruction of Gaza, I don't see any difference really in the trajectory between the Trump or the Biden and the Trump administrations. It's true. Just in case people are curious about the death toll, there's one very, very good study done by I forget her name now. She's a researcher at the London School of Health and Hygiene, I think. Zaina is her first name. I just can't remember her last name, but. It's what's called a capture-recapture analysis. The technical details don't matter, but it's basically a statistical trickery kind of thing. And what they found is that the Ministry of Health is actually underreporting violent deaths by about 40%. Now, I strongly suspect that is actually still an underestimate, but that's the data that we actually have. There was also, there's an article or a paper, a study under peer review right now where they actually did a household survey of people in the Gaza Strip. It wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't a very good one. But nevertheless, it is what we have, and it also shows the same thing, actually, that violent deaths are being undercounted by about 40%. In terms of what are normally called the indirect causes of war, starvation, disease, displacement, despair, things like that, that is an extremely difficult thing to study in the Gaza Strip right now because you can't go to the most deprived people. They live in a free fire zone, you know. So it's just a very, very hard thing to study, and just nobody has any idea how many people have died. I can't remember if I mentioned it here already or not, but in October of last year, me and 98 other American healthcare professionals who've worked in Gaza, we wrote our second letter to the Biden administration. And in the appendix, we pointed out that if you look at the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification data, that's the group that monitors these major problems of famine in the world. If you look at their data for Gaza, it was impossible to conclude that less than 60,000 people had already died of starvation-related causes in Gaza. Now, it seems like that would have been an overestimate. Like, that's not actually, the question isn't whether that many people died or this many people died. The point is, the reason we made the point was that when you have data showing that you might have killed tens of thousands of people by starvation-related causes, and incidentally, a lot of whom would have been small children. Children under 5 are the people most vulnerable to starvation-related deaths. Any decent person would say, well, we got to figure out what the real answer is. You know, a real household survey would take literally 1 week of suspending the bombing and cost about $10,000 to do. It's nothing. It's literally nothing. Like I'm actually trying to organize one right now. It costs absolutely nothing. Our government just doesn't care, you know. And that's the thing. Is like this is what the more you learn about this, the harder it is to not realize what the government of the federal government of the United States is. It's not a pretty picture at all. I mean, there's good things that come out of it too, like, you know, SNAP benefits or something. But it's not a pretty picture. And it is a deeply, deeply immoral institution, the way it functions. And again, it's our job to make it function differently.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I am wondering about your impressions of how receptive the medical profession in general has been over the last 2 years. If you've noticed a sea change or, you know, anything. It seemed like, at least, you know, at the outset, that the American Medical Association was really unwilling to take a strong stand for a ceasefire, and I'm just wondering if, you know, there's been any shift that you've detected in, you know, how willing doctors have been to acknowledge that medicine and health is political.
Yeah, it's a good question. Do you mean the AMA specifically, or?
Yeah, that was one example, and then I was thinking about Rupa Maria and the repression that she's faced. I think she lost her job at
Yeah, there are, It's a very mixed bag, let me say it that way. It very often seems to depend on like who is the chair of this department, who is the dean of this school. So like, for example, I had a Grand Rounds. Grand Rounds is like a kind of an honorific talk that you're invited to give if you're an expert on something. And it's at the level of a department. So like the surgery department or the pediatrics department, something like that. And so I was invited to give one at my own residency alma mater, Boston Medical Center. And it was scheduled, everything was fine. And I know the chair and the program director very well. I spent years with them. And they're extremely decent human beings. I mean, they're like, it'd be hard to find more decent human beings than Alec Farber and Don Hess. But they called me maybe I think a month before it was supposed to happen. And they said, sorry, the administration canceled it. As soon as they learned about it, they won't let it happen. I said, well, okay, fine. So I recorded a talk, sent it to the residents, and they did what they wanted with it, I guess. At the same time, UC Davis, which is, I live in Stockton, California, which is just south of Sacramento, and the Davis Med School and Medical Center is in Sacramento. So UC Davis asked me to give a Grand Rounds in September of last year. They canceled that as well about a month before, but just before I flew here, I spoke at their med school. So it's like super random. In terms of doctors acknowledging what's going on, you know, physicians, are you a physician or no? So physicians are rather uninterested in these kinds of things for the most part. Not all of them, like I'm a doctor obviously, but for the most part, this is not something this kind of thing isn't really what they pay attention to. But the ones who do learn what's going on are genuinely horrified by it. Like, I'll just give you an example. The chair of my department is a guy named Frank. He's a right-wing evangelical Christian Trump voting fellow. And when I told him I was going to go to Gaza, I was really worried actually that he was going to get pissed off, but he didn't. I just said, you know, Frank, I'm going to go to Gaza, and he said, oh, you just be careful, man. Those Muslims, man, you never know what they're going to do. And I was like, thanks, Frank. That's great. And to be fair, that's the same advice my dad gives me because, you know, my parents fled Pakistan as non-Muslims, so it's their life's experience. But so I said, you know, thanks, Frank. I appreciate the advice. So I went, and when I came back, I gave a talk at the hospital during our research day, and and Frank was there. And afterwards, he came over to me. He's like, Feroze, I had no idea. This is awful. Why are we supporting this? Now Frank won't stop sending me like videos of Jeffrey Sachs talking, and I'm like, it's like, you know. So people, I think when doctors are confronted with the reality of it, it's very hard. You know, are you in favor of shooting children? Yes or no? It's pretty hard to answer yes, you know. Even the people who aren't willing to admit it out loud, and he's certainly not. He's a very decent human being. It just happens to be that he listens to the wrong YouTube channel or something, so he's been driven nuts. And it was actually kind of interesting. Maybe a second story is worthwhile. The reason I gave that talk was it was our research day. So we had a visiting professor, and it was my buddy Ryan Mocht, he's a Jewish guy from Connecticut, and he and I were co-chiefs. We graduated from our residency in the same class from surgery, and then I ended up near him in California. He's in the Bay Area. And so I said, you know, do you want to come be our speaker for the research day? And he's like, yeah, sure, that sounds fun. So when I had gone to Gaza the first time, I put on my little Facebook page, which is just for my friends. It's not like public or anything. I just put that I was going to go to Gaza, and like I said, at that time you could take supplies. So I said, if anybody wants to donate money, go for it. And I remember I thought about tagging Ryan or not. I was like, should I tag Ryan? Because whenever the conflict would come up in residency, when we knew each other, he wouldn't argue with me, but he would just say, you know, Feroze, this isn't what I grew up hearing, and I'm not comfortable. You know, Ryan, we're not going to solve the Israel-Palestine conflict together, so it's okay. Like, we're friends. We don't have to talk about this. But when I asked him to come be the visiting professor, normally the visiting professor gives 2 lectures, one in the morning and one in the evening. And I said, you know, what do you want to talk about in the evening? And he said, I don't know, I don't have anything else to talk about. Do you want to just talk about Gaza? So I actually gave the same talk I gave earlier today, just across from UW Med Center. I gave that same talk, but with some slides. And Ryan, he was sitting right where you're sitting. He is actually crying by the end of it. because he knows this is being done in his name. You know, he's not a religious guy. He's not terribly interested in Israel. I think he went on a birthright trip as a kid, but he's never been back. You know, it's not a, so, but, you know, but he was just, he couldn't believe it, you know. And ever since, you know, it's just, so I think when physicians are confronted with the actual reality of what's going on, it's pretty hard for them to say they're in favor of it, you know. Are they willing to do anything about it? Well, that's different, but you know, I do think that the efforts that have been, so I think physicians, this is one thing where you see that physicians really don't know what we're doing when it comes to political organizing, because we think we're smarter than everybody else, and don't listen to anybody else, you know. But which I've been guilty of, certainly. But one of the things that doctors who have wanted to do something have tried to do is focus on their own hospital, saying our hospital has to acknowledge Israel's committing genocide in Gaza. There's no way that's going to happen. They're going to be like, what the hell are you talking? What is Israel? We have no idea what you're even saying. That's just not how hospitals work. You know, like I live in the most violent county in California, and I work at the only trauma center there, and it would be absurd for the hospital itself to make a statement about gun violence. It just doesn't. That's just not how hospitals work. They don't do that. But medical associations, like, you know, the AMA or the American College of Surgeons or something like that, that's very different. They make those statements all the time, and they should. That's, you know, like you said, you know, medicine and politics have a major intersection. And this is actually part of the study of medicine in the past like 10, 15, 20 years, is the study of what are called social determinants of health. You know, in the U.S., the major one is homelessness that people think about, but, you know, poverty, exposure to crime, lack of education, things like that. And it's widely understood and widely acknowledged, nobody denies it in any other context, that the social determinants of health are largely politically determined, right? It's a choice if we want to educate people or not. It's a choice if we want to, you know, do this or that. And so, totally lost my train of thought. Why were we talking about that? What's the saying? Yeah, boy. Oh yeah, thank you. So so the medical associations, this is in their recent statements. It's in there, and furthermore, a lot of them made statements about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in fact, a lot of them made statements about the Russian invasion of Ukraine that were ridiculous, like totally taking a very clear political stance on the invasion, clearly having no understanding of what's going on there at all, but just saying, you know, rah rah rah, Ukraine good, Russia bad, everything else is bunk, which is just. That's kind of inappropriate for a minute. Like, they shouldn't be taking a stance on the political aspects of the conflict. They should be taking a stance on the targeting of healthcare workers in these conflicts. And so that's what we're trying to do now. A lot of physicians groups are working on that. And the initial efforts were run by groups that I think just didn't really know what they were doing, and they were demanding that the American Medical Association come out and condemn genocide in Gaza, which again would be nice, but it's very unlikely to happen. But they could come out and condemn the targeting of healthcare workers in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Tigray, in Ethiopia. And as long as Gaza is included in that list, that's a big deal. Like, I actually had a meeting with the U.S. Special Envoy for Humanitarian Affairs in the Middle East, which is basically just the U.S.'s Gaza envoy under the Biden administration. It used to be David Satterfield. He got thrown out when he told the American Jewish Congress stuff that they didn't want to hear, and then it became Elise Grande. So, who is also a very serious person. You know, she's a military person, a very middle-of-the-road Democrat. Not you know, she and I wouldn't agree on very much politically, but still a very serious person who was actually interested in this question and was really horrified by what was being done in Gaza, or what is being done in Gaza. And I asked her during our discussion, I said, you know, we've written these 2 letters to the Biden administration. I've written in the New York Times. It's hardly a secret. She herself said that the Biden administration knows exactly what's going on in Gaza, and they're just deciding that it's worthwhile to keep it going, politically worthwhile to keep it going. And so I said, you know, what could American doctors, because it was me and 2 other doctors meeting with her, what could we do? Like, I feel like we've done everything we could. And she actually just said, you could get your institutions, your societies to make statements. And I said, well, they're not going to come out and condemn. She said, no, they don't have to. All they have to do is say something that is about Gaza, just anything. If they even just mention it, people will start saying, oh boy, we're pissing off the wrong people now. The wrong people are mad about this now. doctors are important people. You know, we're wealthy, we're well respected, we have a high education. Well, most of us participate in the political process at least by voting and donating to political campaigns. You know, and then we're just respected in society for whatever reason. So so yes, you know, that's
Okay. I'm going to, first of all, thank you, everybody, for being here. Dr. Sidhwa will be at the Anti-War Cafe tomorrow at noon. That's the crossing 1127 University Avenue. One thing I would like to observe, because I think between the Biden administration and our current administration, there's probably zero difference in terms of Gaza. One thing that is different is that people are being arrested, labeled terrorists, they are being incarcerated and deported for doing exactly what we are doing here tonight. And what we are doing here tonight, there is a very fine line between it being criminalized and not. There is a very real growing threat of fascism in our country and globally. And addressing that is part of addressing Gaza. That understanding that the work that Voces de la Frontera does to protect people in our community is part of this struggle. That supporting the Anishinaabe in northern Wisconsin who are fighting the fossil fuel infrastructure that is being forced down their throats is part of this struggle. But really, I want to go back to that the students and people who are being incarcerated have done nothing that you didn't do tonight. Nothing. And like, we have a job here, and it's stopping these weapons and realizing that also we are the community. We are the strength that we have. It's us as people and being organized. Get organized. So thank you. Thank you so much. And come to the Anti-War Cafe and know again that we'll be in Milwaukee and that this struggle continues and the arc of this struggle is very long. We owe so much to those who came before us. We have obligations to ourselves and our families and children and people and to all those who are yet to come. So thank you. And I'm sure that if you have a question that's really important, I know that Dr. Sidhwa would be very happy to talk to you for a few minutes, but our person at the back in the desk there, it's time to let him go home. Thanks.